All right, so Classic Hearthstone came out in 2014. Classic set was the base for every class for every expansion until that moment it got rotated. Throughout its time, Classic cards were nerfed, not nerfed, or they were banned from Standard, also known as being Hall of Famed. Your job today is to ask yourself, do I think this Classic card was not nerfed, was it nerfed, or was it banned from Standard when the Classic set was relevant in the Standard format?
Ooh, I like this. This is gonna be fun.
Just for people who are wondering, because obviously Hearthstone was in a it was in beta and it was alpha. I am counting the cards from when the game was fully released till the point they rotated out. Oh, like this card actually was nerfed in alpha? I'm not considering that, okay?
Shadowstep. 0 cost. I think this is Rogue.
This is Rogue.
Rogue was like the gray black card. Yeah. Return a friendly minion to your hand. It costs 2 less. Okay. So if I've learned anything from you and doing these videos, most of the time there's any sort of like mana cheating in any sense, it's probably abusable and it's probably really good. So I think this card's really good. I think there's probably like plenty of ways to abuse this, and especially as Hearthstone aged, it probably got better and better. Do I think this is bad enough that they had to either nerf this card or, sorry, Hall of Fame? You don't ban cards in Hearthstone. It's Hall of Fame.
But for the YouTube title, it is banned. So you can say banned.
Yeah, of course, for the metrics, right? For the metrics, yeah. SEO loves banned. If you throw banned in any video title, oh, people lose their minds. It's great.
I cooked here. Okay, I cooked.
I think this could get bad enough that it would require a nerf. I don't know if this is bad enough to get Hall of Fame. I could see it getting Hall of Fame potentially, but at the same time, it's kind of weird because I also feel like they want to keep cards in the game, and I feel like Hall of Faming is almost like an absolute last resort, unless there's like some other reason that they decide to Hall of Fame stuff. So I'm going to go that this was nerfed. I think that's where I sit on this one.
Final answer.
Final answer. Do I have to guess the nerf, or are you just going to tell me that?
No. You can say it's nerfed. It's fine.
Oh. This card
was not nerfed. This card was
really?
in Standard all the way through up until this point. It is still in the Standard format. They kept it after the rotation of Classic. This card.
Do you agree with that?
Cards have been nerfed because of Shadowstep. I think the reason. The reason why they haven't, I think in my opinion, why they haven't actually nerfed it is because it's so crucial to how Rogue plays that they don't want to take it away, because it is a fun card to play with and people really like it. If you're a Rogue player, you probably love this card. Does it allow for really stupid shit? Absolutely. Mana cheating is broken in Hearthstone like in any other card game, but it's never been to the point where like they absolutely have to ban it.
Leper Gnome, 1 mana, 2/1 Death Rattle. Deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. See, I hate this because like I'm gonna say this card sucks, and then you're gonna be like, oh yeah, they had to nerf this. This is like one of the best cards ever, or like they Hall of Fame this card for some dumb reason. I don't think they did that. I'm trying to even like imagine some scenario that this card would need to get hit in any capacity. But you said they didn't hit Shadowstep, so like anything's on the table at this point.
Yep.
I'm trying to think why there would be a world that they have to nerf this. I don't think this got Hall of Fame. If this got Hall of Fame, then I'm never playing Hearthstone. Out of principle, I feel like that's just probably better for my mental health. Why would you show me Shadowstep and then this? You could have started with this at least.
Listen, it can also just not be nerfed. Like there is that category, right?
Yeah, see, like, this is where, at this point, you and I have done so many of these that this is just all a mind game. This is, like, everything we talk about is just Fugazi. It's fairy dust. None of this actually matters. It's just, can I figure out why you showed me this and just get in your head to figure out the correct answer here? I'm gonna say it's not nerfed. Tell me it's nerfed. Tell me they nerfed it. I know that's the right answer. Just tell me they nerfed it. On principle, I can't say they nerfed this.
That's completely fair. I think most people, like, again, in a vacuum, you would probably say this card wasn't nerfed, and I completely understand. This card was nerfed.
I knew it. I should have said it.
This in Hearthstone, a 1 mana card that has 2 attack is pretty good in the early days of Hearthstone because it allows it to trade up to a 2-drop. So if you played Leper Gnome and your opponent had to play a 2-drop, most of the time that Leper Gnome can trade up. But also, this was one of the premier aggro cards in the game. Because if you went first, it's still 2 damage and you don't want to kill it because you don't want to take 2 extra damage. But if you don't kill it, you're still going to take that 2 damage. So it allowed aggro classes to just keep going face and not really have any repercussions for it. Eventually, and not even eventually, 2 years later when Old Gods came out, they nerfed this card to 1 attack, so it can no longer trade up. The card was still, I think, played. Obviously, it wasn't as good anymore because you couldn't trade up anymore. But yeah, it remained like that until the classic set rotated out. and it is no longer in standard.
Let me give you some context for this, okay?
Okay, go for it.
What if I told you there's a Yu-Gi-Oh card that is a... Let's even say it's 1 mana. I was going to say 0, but let's just say it's a 1 mana 4/1 that says Death Rattle, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero, summon 2 more of this.
Oh my god, yeah. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, so that card is a very old card called Giant Germ, and that card has been at 3 forever. That saw, like, very minimal play early on in Yu-Gi-Oh! And, it's just like, that's what I'm thinking of when I see this card. I'm like, this is bad Giant Germ. And Giant Germ never saw any, like, reasonable play. And I know the games are different, but it's like, you're telling me Giant Germ had to be nerfed? I'm like, that's like insane to me. So, okay. There. Tundra Rhino, 5 mana, 2/5. Your beasts have charge. See, like, okay, if I know anything from some of the videos we've done before, I know that they had to start changing a lot of stuff with charge to rush because charge was like really, really broken. And so now I feel like they use charge very sparingly and like they always default to rush unless there's like a reason for them to use charge. So like you could just like drop this guy down and like, you know, just do some, you know, dumb hunter stuff and just kill them, right?
Right.
But again, like, does that warrant this card getting nerfed? I don't know. Like, maybe this is fine because it costs 5 mana. But you're going to be like, oh, yeah, this card's insane. They had to make this like 7 mana. This is like also another thing with Yu-Gi-Oh! That's so funny. Because like charge, our guys always have charge. So we're like used to that.
I'm going to read you what the philosophy for what Hall of Fame is, okay? So you have a bigger context here.
I haven't even considered that for this card, for the record.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Problematic, frequently played, and design hindering cards in the standard format are moved to the Hall of Fame to remove them from play in standard. When cards are moved to the Hall of Fame set, they're removed from their previous sets and will no longer appear in card packs, obviously. Okay? So the idea of the Hall of Fame, right, is if the card hinders design for future sets because they can't design cards around it, that means it goes to the Hall of Fame.
I guess you guys are just a bunch of babies because like in Yu-Gi-Oh, we have that all the time where there's this old card from like 20 years ago that all of a sudden there's this like exact deck that was like almost designed with that card in mind. And now all of a sudden it becomes playable. And granted, you have set rotation and all that stuff. I get what you're saying. I understand. I think this card, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say just it didn't get nerfed.
Tundra Rhino is a really cool card because it allows you to build your hunter deck in a very specific way that anything you summon, doesn't matter if it's from a death rattle, doesn't matter if you pull it from your deck, and it gets charged and immediately can attack. And you could probably imagine with hunter and beast, there's a lot of synergy there, and that can lead to a lot of different ways to kill your opponent. This card being at 5 mana was the pivotal thing to stop a lot of that stuff from happening. So you're right, it did not get nerfed. It was a completely balanced card. And
I was about to lose it if you said this got like Hall of Famed or something.
No.
Okay. Flametongue Totem. I vaguely remember this card. 2 mana 0/3. Adjacent minions have +2 attack. I would think this is like good. Having 3 health is fine for 2 mana. There's probably like totem support, and the totem support over time probably got better as time progressed. And like I could see there's like maybe a world where this card like possibly became a problem. I don't know like what that would look like. Maybe something where it's like, oh, you know, if some shaman thing has like some charge aspect or something like that, you can just do like a huge amount of burst damage out of nowhere. But see, I hate that you have like Hall of Fame in this because like I do have to consider that like to like a minor extent. For the most part, I'm kind of just ignoring it altogether because I feel like that's like the hardest thing to evaluate. If they would they really Hall of Fame this card? I feel like if this is such like an iconic card for Shaman, like unless this is like an instance where every deck for Shaman is already playing 2 of this card by default, then maybe they would Hall of Fame it because it's like, okay, we want you guys to like play something else. I could also just see it being fine. I could see it being fine. So I'm gonna go with my gut and say this got nerfed in some capacity.
Okay, so Flametongue Totem, as you notably said, that this card was played in Classic. The great thing about Flametongue Totem is it allowed Shaman's hero power to be pretty relevant. This card was really, really good. Like in Classic, it was amazing. This card continuously became one of the most played cards in Shaman up until the point it was finally nerfed. They nerfed this card in the worst set ever, which was Rastakon's Rumble, to 3 mana. At 3 mana, this card became infinitely worse. And by making it 3, it just kind of broke the way Shaman played with it, and they didn't really want it anymore. Eventually, what they did was, this one was very interesting. They made it cost 2, but then they also nerfed the health stat to 2. So that no longer could you put it on the board and feel comfortable that it's going to survive. Now it's like a little bit iffy because now a 1-drop can trade up to it. Now it is still in standard and it is back to its original self. Because
that's so funny. It's gone through 3 revisions and they just went full circle. That's amazing. Oh my God. Okay, Fiery War Axe. This, if I recall, isn't this like just the quintessential like warrior weapon, right?
This was a very, very good weapon in Classic for warrior. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I think I remember seeing this from the short time that I played. So the interesting thing about weapons is that it does bypass the summoning sickness, right? If you're using your own health as a resource. But as we know, if you're using your health as a resource, as long as you're not dying, you're perfectly okay with that. So that's one of like the really cool things about weapons, I feel like, is that it provides like this interesting trade-off. So I don't think this card's bad. I think this card is very good. You kind of already said that anyway. But even before you said that, I'm pretty sure like you would happily just play this because it's like you just get to kill 2 things in the early game. And even in the later game, like if there's like weapon buffs or if you have like a minion trade into something and then you finish it off with the Fiery War Axe, like you're probably fine with that. This is probably like the first card you've shown me that I could see being Hall of Fame. Just for like that reason, because so right now in Master Duel, Max C has like a 95% play rate, and like everyone is just calling for them to ban this card, and they're never going to. But everyone's deck in Master Duel basically starts with 3 copies of Max C, and then the 12 cards that like counter Max C so that you don't get Max C'd by your opponent. And so that is not a very fun way to go about deck building, where like when you immediately pull up the deck building page, you're going to say, all right, I need to put these exact 15 cards in every single deck, and now I'm going to build the rest of my deck. Like that's not fun. I'm going to say this loosely. Okay. Blizzard is probably more competent than Konami in this regard. There is a world I could see that they would Hall of Fame the War Axe because they're tired of every single warrior deck playing 2 Fiery War Axe in their deck because it's just like the best thing you could be doing at 2 mana because it's like good removal. It's just like a very versatile, flexible card. And so they want to inspire deck diversity because there's like no other card that's going to do what this does. And so harkening back to kind of what you said earlier when you were reading about why they would Hall of Fame a card, this is like the first card I could legitimately see them Hall of Faming. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say they Hall of Famed it. Final answer.
So I'm actually going to read another part of the design philosophy or the Hall of Fame philosophy.
Okay.
If a metagame largely consists of decks which are too similar core in ideas, the development team will consider making changes to problematic cards found in such decks. Moving problematic cards into the Hall of Fame is one way in which a fresh meta can be ensured, which was basically what you were alluding to when you're saying, like, if I'm building the same 15 cards in every single deck, a lot of the decks are going to play very similarly. Fiery War Axe was a card that was played in every single archetype for warrior. This card was not Hall of Famed. It was nerfed though. It was. It took them all the way up till Knights of the Frozen Throne to nerf it to 3 mana. Now I'm gonna ask you a question. At 3 mana, do you think this card was played?
Oof. Well, I thought it was Hall of Famed at 2, so I mean, well, like we talked about with Flametongue Totem, going from 2 to 3 is a really big difference. And once you start getting into the difference of stats, like once you start getting into like 3 and 4 drops, I think it becomes a lot harder for decks to like just get the easy cleanup with this card. But I still think it's very good even at 3. But it's fighting for a lot of other cards in that slot. And then you also lose out on, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh! We don't have to worry about this problem because we can play as many cards as we want. But you also have to worry about the fact that if this is 3 mana, that's best case scenario, 7 extra mana you have to do your plays instead of 8. And so maybe that messes with the math in some way.
Okay, so you're entirely right. Going from 2 to 3 is a really big deal in Hearthstone, right? That is a huge increase of mana because it's just such a low mana cost. At 3 mana, this card was unplayable. Like, it did not see any play. But the reason why is because other weapons at 3 mana just ended up being better.
Ironbeak Owl, 2 mana, 2/1 beast, battle cry, silence a minion. Okay. It's better than the Leper Gnome in my eyes.
Really? Okay.
It's all like contextual, right? Sure. The fact that, because, okay, I come from a game where effect negation, especially because we interact with the opponent's turn, is so valuable, right? And this card is basically like your equivalent of effect negation. Would they have to nerf this? If they did, there's no way they're really changing the effect on this. I mean, I guess they could. Like, what would they do instead? Like, Death Rattle, Silence a Minion? That card becomes infinitely shit if that's the case. Maybe they could just make it 3 mana instead of 2, because maybe 2 mana for this type of effect is too cheap for like what it does. It's also a 2/1, so it's like its stats are like also pretty decent. See, like, I don't see this is a neutral card. I don't see every deck playing like 2 Ironbeak Owl, and I don't see this being oppressive enough that it has to be Hall of Famed. But, like, I could be wrong. I feel like if there is a world where this card somehow became a problem, also with the way that, like, you've told me battle cries work is just, like, so interesting that, like, you can't even really, like, do a lot of, like, crazy stuff to, like, cheese this in ways. I can see them making this 3 mana, but it's really hard for me to, like, say that this is, like, so oppressive. It's, like, just having this thing that, like, silences a minion at 2 mana that crazy. Could be. Especially as the game gets older, this card could just actually get better. I'm going to go with my gut. I'm going to say they didn't nerf this. And okay. I would love to hear the story behind this one.
So, Ironbeak Owl was a very playable card in Classic. The reason being is that a neutral silence minion was pretty great, and at 2 mana, it was very easy to add this to any deck that needed it. With a beast, you can put that in Hunter and allow yourself to play beast synergy cards, but also if there was a big fucking taunt in the way for 2 mana, you stop it from being a taunt and you just go face.
Oh, that's right. I forgot silence can stop taunt. Yeah, so, that's true. Okay, that's a big deal in Hearthstone. Yeah,
Ironbeak Owl ended up being one of the best neutral cards in Classic, but they did not touch it for a while until, for some reason, they said to themselves, we're going to nerf this card to 3 mana.
So there wasn't a reason? They just like, it's too good. Make it 3.
Well, I'm going to give you the reason for it. Because that Hearthstone, luckily for us, I don't know if they do this for Yu-Gi-Oh! If they like ban something, if they give like a statement, but often they...
That's funny.
Often, depending on what the situation is, especially during the Ben Brode era, he would explain why they wanted to nerf that card, because they nerf so far and few between.
Good. You guys have it you're so coddled. You're so coddled.
It's lovely. That's why Yu-Gi-Oh scares me so much. The reason was Ironbeak Owl is a staple source for an inexpensive silence in many decks. In line with our overall goal to make silence effects more costly, Ironbeak Owl is moving from 2 to 3 mana.
That's so interesting. Do you like personally, do you agree with that, or do you think that like Ironbeak Owl was fine? I'd be curious to hear what the comments think about that too, just generally.
It's interesting because I think I can't remember what it was like back in the day. I want to say that it was probably needed if they truly felt like they couldn't design cards if that was at 2 mana, like, and have their cards playable. Because the other side of the coin is like, if I'm designing new cards that have these really cool effects and they're not battle cries, and then there's this fucking owl just sitting in the corner, like, how are any of these cards going to be fun and exciting if like the next turn your opponent goes, nice card, idiot, and then they just silence it, right?
The one side, and this is where my Yu-Gi-Oh brain goes, where it's like get good, like deal with it, like stop being a baby, right? And then there's the other side where like you said, where Ben Brode's like, I just want to make sure that people get to like have fun playing with their cards. And while this isn't, I wouldn't say this is oppressive just because it just silences one thing, right? It's good to have counterplay to cards in games and have it be easily accessible, right? Yep. And I could see that from my understanding of like their card design philosophy, because I do like reading a lot of like just game design articles generally, or like watching videos because I find it really fascinating. If I recall, I believe they are like heavily against like player experiencing negative emotion to keep them wanting to play the game. And I could see that like going against that philosophy, because it's like, yay, I get to play my big thing. Oh no, it got silenced. Like, fuck this game, right? So I get it.
Yeah. I think that change was probably necessary. Now, the weird part is currently in the game, it is still 3 mana. It's not in standard, but like in wild, it is just sitting there, like unusable. So it's very interesting that they just didn't unnerf it, but maybe because in wild it'd still be unplayable.
Meanwhile, Flametongue Totem did the totem circle dance and did full rotation. Vanish, 6 mana. Return all minions to their owner's hands. Oh, I've shown you something similar to this for Yu-Gi-Oh before.
You did.
You love your sap effects, from what I remember. You love your sap effects.
Yeah, dude, they're great. When I play them.
Exactly. Well, that's card games, right? When you play it, it's great. When my opponent plays it, I want to just jump off a cliff. Okay, so this is just a board wipe. It's also a very unique board wipe because it bounces stuff back to the hand. It's funny because, like, in Yu-Gi-Oh, I want to say, and I'm sure someone's going to correct me on this, I cannot think of a card that does this, like, proactively. So we have a card called Storming Mirror Force. If you know Mirror Force, this is going to make sense. So Mirror Force, when your opponent attacks, it destroys all their monsters. Storming Mirror Force does the same thing, except instead of destroying everything, it bounces the stuff back to the hand. And that card is, it was never, like, particularly good, but the interesting application that it had is that because it doesn't destroy things, in the instance of, like, extra deck monsters, it puts them back in the extra deck. And then if anything has, like, destruction protection, it plays around that. Also, if stuff would trigger in the graveyard, it doesn't put the stuff in the graveyard, it puts it back in the hand. Having, like, a proactive way to just, like, you know, bounce a whole board of stuff is, you know, pretty good in, like, Yu-Gi-Oh, just because it plays around a lot of, like, interesting type of effects. And so maybe in Hearthstone it has, like, a similar purpose, but it's also just a board wipe at the end of the day. 6 mana seems like a bit expensive, but maybe you're paying a premium just because you're having that ability. But I could also see it being, like, maybe too expensive. Like, maybe they had to nerf it to... Well, you said nerf. They didn't buff any of these, right?
No, I'm not showing any cards that are buff, no.
Okay. So all these are nerfs, which means they'd have to make it, like, 7 mana. And that seems, like, really expensive. I still think people would probably play this, though. Would they Hall of Fame this card? I didn't get the visceral they would Hall of Fame this card reaction, but I could be wrong. I think this is fine. I don't think they nerf this.
Okay. That's your final answer?
Final answer.
Okay.
Final answer.
This one's actually really interesting because I think you're right. 6 mana for an effect like this isn't actually that egregious, considering that also Flame Strike is 1 more mana and it only interacts with your opponent's side and it just does 4 damage to every minion, which was very playable in Classic. The thing about Vanish, though, is that it is not a very fun card. And this is where we come down to the Hall of Fame philosophy, because this is your very first time seeing a Hall of Fame card. While we like Rogue's knack for getting out of sticky situations with targeted removal, Vanish allows them to effectively clear an entire board. This negates one of their intended weaknesses, reduces our ability to design towards their strength, and makes it harder for players to strategize against Rogue. So this is the first time they believed that Vanish was just so hard to design cards around the Rogue class that they had to get rid of it. Also, from a player standpoint, it is miserable to play against this card, especially with a card like Preparation, which I'm not going to show you, which was 0 mana, reduce a spell by 2. And
okay,
that was
a lot earlier on.
Yeah, so Vanish allowed Rogue to get, like, they're using sticky situations here, but this is the first time I'm also going to bring up what they want classes to be able to do during this era of Hearthstone. Currently, it's a much different game. Rogue having the availability to just have a board clear was, like, really bad for what they wanted Rogue to do, especially what they were designing for. So they got rid of this card because they just can't design cards around this.
It's funny because, like, when instinctively when I read this, it's like, oh, good, I get all the stuff back to my hand. Like, that sucks, but at least I can just replay it next turn. It didn't go to the graveyard. It didn't get banished. You know, there's, like, all these other things that could have happened to it. It's like, good, I can just play it again. So it's funny that, like, as a Yu-Gi-Oh player, my reaction to this is like, oh, it sucks, but it's not that bad. But from, you know, Hearthstone perspective, like, this is, like, one of the worst cards ever. I don't know. It's funny. It's funny.
Now, the interesting about this card is it took them 5 years to Hall of Fame this.
Okay.
So it did take them a very long time. Let's move on to your next card.
Acolyte of Pain. 3 mana, 1/3. Whenever this minion takes damage, draw a card. I will say this right now. If this was in Yu-Gi-Oh, people would be finding ways to abuse the ever-living shit out of this card. Because card draw, as you know in Yu-Gi-Oh, is at a premium. Like, it is so hard to come by. So if there was, like, I don't know how it would work in Yu-Gi-Oh, because minions don't, like, retain damage in Yu-Gi-Oh. So they'd have to come up with, like, maybe it's like if you take life point damage, like, you get to draw a card. Oh, man, people would be looking for any way to break this. I imagine this was a very good card. Like, even, what is it? Like, Mage has, like, the hero power, right? So you can just play this, ping it with your fire, because Mage is, like, the only thing I played when I played Classic. So, like, immediately I'm like, oh, this is crazy. Cool. I get to draw a card, and this guy sticks around, and then probably draws me another card. Sounds pretty good. See, now, okay, like, this is a card I could see getting Hall of Famed. For, like, that, like, this is, like, another card where I could see them just always want, like, anyone who's playing this game, who's playing, like, one of several different classes, is immediately just throwing 2 of this card in their deck. Immediately, just because this card is, like, way too good. I feel like this card could be so centralizing for certain decks that it's just like, this is all the decks want to do. And even as they come out with more cards, people don't care because this card is just, like, too good. But obviously I'm Yu-Gi-Oh brained, and, like, I see draw a card and my eyes light up. Fuck it. I say they Hall of Fame this too. Final answer. I'm on to your games.
Okay, I'm going to start by saying this. Acolyte of Pain is one of my favorite cards of all time. I think it's one of the best design cards of all time. I think it's really well thought out, and I think it's one of the best reasons why Classic Hearthstone was such a success. It is just such a good card to have in the pool for what Hearthstone wants to do. Obviously, Yu-Gi-Oh! It's slightly different because of the way you look at draw, but for a long time, this was one of the best ways to draw cards. It worked really nicely in Warrior. You thought about the ping for Mage to just get one extra card. And the idea of, do I trade into a bigger minion to only get one draw, or do I trade into another one or a smaller minion to get more than one draw? Do I have to worry about fatigue? It is just such a well-designed card. But you are right. It was Hall of Famed. Now,
yes,
the thing, the thing is it took them unironically all the way up until the very last year to change it, or to nerf it to Hall of Fame. This card was in the game for literally untouched forever. This is one of our most popular cards in neutral for a card draw, but it makes it very difficult to identify which classes draw a ton of cards and which classes only draw a few. By rotating Acolyte of Pain, we'll actually get to make more cards in the vein of Acolyte of Pain, but in a different, varied way. So they Hall of Fame this card because they wanted to make more varied ways to draw cards.
I think that makes sense. I get that. Because, like, again, you have to, if this card's in the format, everyone's going to be looking to Acolyte of Pain as a comparative point that it's like, all right, well, is this better than Acolyte of Pain? No, well, screw that. So, and, you know, from a business perspective, they want you to buy more packs, so I get it.
Absolutely makes sense. I will say, though, at this point in time, it wasn't played as much as you probably think it was.
Keeper of the Grove. Well, if it's a Druid card, it's already busted, so they probably Hall of Fame this too. 4 mana, 2/4. Choose one, deal 2 damage, or silence a minion. I like vaguely remember this, not like in terms of like playing with it or anything. I think I would just recall seeing this guy like once or twice from when I did used to play. Because for context, me playing Hearthstone was on my lunch break when I still worked like my normal job. That was like the only Hearthstone I played. It was like I would go get my food and then I would just pull out my phone, and we didn't have like Master Duel or anything yet. So I just like, oh, like this is just this fun card game I could play during my lunch break. And that was the extent of it.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Okay, well, we already talked about what you said about silencing stuff. This is obviously not, it's different because it's specifically in Druid versus being like a neutral card. The flexibility's nice. The stats, I feel like, are quite good considering like the value you get out of this. I'm trying to think like, okay, if they nerf this, what would they do? They could make it cost 5, and I feel like that could be an instance where it's like at 4, this card's crazy. At 5, it's unplayable, depending on what else Druid has during this time. They could nerf, like they could make it deal like 1 damage or something, or like I guess they could completely change the silence thing potentially, but that seems like they wouldn't do that. That seems like way too radical of a change. They could also just make it like a 1/4, so it's not like super resilient. I mean, well, it's resilient, it just isn't able to trade back as efficiently. Seems like a good card. I think just the flexibility on this card is really nice. I don't get Hall of Fame vibes from this. So if you show me 3 in a row, you got me. Fair. I feel like there's a world where they nerf this for maybe the reason that I said. So I'm kind of leaning that way, but I also could see this card being totally fine and they just don't touch it at all. So I will just go with that they did nerf it. I don't know how, but I think it's more of like this was just like the best thing it could be doing at 4 mana potentially. So I'll go with that. Final answer.
Okay, so Druid was known for basically 2 different things. Their choose one mechanic, which is you correctly like evaluated. The flexibility of these cards was really cool. It's also very interesting to play with, but also ramping. And Wild Growth.
That's right, you could ramp.
Wild Growth was 2 mana. They also had Innervate at 2 additional mana crystals. I'm not showing you Innervate or Wild Growth in this video because I already knew that you would probably take a pretty good guess on if they were nerfed or not. Yeah, they were both really good at Classic. And Keeper of the Grove was a good 4-drop. But you're lucky I showed you Owl, because Owl was a good indication that they wanted to nerf Keeper of the Grove for the exact same reason. So they nerfed this card. They nerfed this card to a 4 mana 2/2 is what they decided to do. Keeper of the Grove is a very strong and versatile minion that combines silence with solid stats, which made the decision to include it in every Druid deck virtually automatic. Whether or not to introduce a source of silence to a deck should require some decision making. So Keeper of the Grove shouldn't be a default choice for all Druid decks. Its stats have been changed from a 2/4 to a 2/2. Now I'm going to ask you this question. Do you think it was played at a 2/2.
Let me ask you this. Were you basically always using this to ping, but then if the silence was relevant, you would just silence instead? Like, was that the play pattern with this?
I would say, like, it is very contextually based on what matchup you were going against. If you were going against aggro, 2 damage was very good. If you're going against, like, a slower deck like Karen I talked about with, like, Control Warrior, silencing that would have been very, very good. So it is very contextual.
I feel like going from 4 health to 2 is a big deal because now all of a sudden a 1-drop can just take this out, right? And that makes a huge difference. Granted, like, maybe you're okay with that, but I don't know. Like, there could be a world where because you just value the flexibility of this card, like, maybe it is still worth it, but at the fact that a 1-drop could just trade into it, that seems really inefficient, even with the flexibility. I'll say no, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was, like, some people who still wanted to play this just because there was, like, a good reason for them to. Like, maybe it was, like, format or deck specific.
No, this card was unplayable. This card was just bad.
Okay. Well, that's why I thought. I'm like, maybe there's a world, but it was hard to see at 2 mana.
Yeah, you
or
really,
2 health.
You really called it there. Like, the fact that, like, almost any minion can now trade up into this, and you're playing it for what, 4 mana deal 2. There's cards that do that, but better.
Hey, the Water Elemental. I know this guy. 4 mana, 3/6. Someone's gonna Photoshop my face on a Water Elemental at some point. Freeze any characters damaged by this minion. Would they have to adjust this? They would have to nerf it. How would they nerf this? I feel like the stats on this card are quite good. The freezing effect is pretty strong. Would this need a nerf? I don't think they would Hall of Fame this. I'm not getting the visceral reaction. If they did, then holy crap, that's incredible. How would they nerf this? Maybe they just lower the health because maybe it just has too much health. I could see that being a problem because it just, like, sticks around for so long. My instincts are telling me they didn't nerf this. I think, like, this card's probably fine. So what do you got?
That's here. Okay.
Yeah.
So Water Elemental was a beefy boy in Classic. A 3/6 stat line for that kind of effect was incredible. And I don't know what deck you think this would probably be played in, but I would imagine that you would probably think it's some kind of tempo mage, which is like where it was played. This card, though, was changed, but it was not nerfed.
Okay.
It was just changed. You know what's very strange about this card, and I actually didn't realize this until this morning. It literally fucking says Water Elemental on the text, but it's not an elemental. So eventually what they did is they added the elemental deck. But
that doesn't count. That doesn't count.
It wasn't nerfed. It wasn't nerfed. Elemental wasn't a type until Ungoro, so it actually doesn't matter. But yeah, I was just trolling. Yeah, it wasn't nerfed. I just wanted to show you this card because you remembered this card, so I figured like, oh, like maybe I can get him if it was nerfed.
I'm gonna get him with this one. Yeah. I would be surprised if they made it like 5 health, right? Like I could see it. They've done like other like trivial stuff like that before. Edwin VanCleef. 3 mana, 2/2. Combo gain +2/+2 for each card played earlier this turn. So if I remember, combo is just like if you played any card before this, like, so basically this just can't be the first card you play that triggers it, right?
Yes.
Got it. Yeah, I think that was like Rogue's gimmick.
It was Rogue. It's still Rogue's gimmick. This one scales technically infinitely if you have infinite cards, right? So it's not just the first time a card's played, it's as many as you want before this.
Well, Rogue already had 1 Hall of Fame card. What are the chances Rogue has 2 Hall of Fame cards, Rarran? Just saying.
Surely Rogue doesn't have 2 Hall of Fame cards.
Surely.
There's no way, man.
Surely.
Rogue hasn't been a problem throughout Hearthstone's history. It's
never. Never.
It's balanced.
Like you said, the fact that you could, like, theoretically infinitely scale this could be, you know, that's where the Yu-Gi-Oh brain goes, right? It's like, okay, how can we make this that this is like a 40-40 and just kill the opponent, right? And like, does it become a problem where every single Rogue deck is trying to design around this one specific card so that way you're able to go like insane with it? Maybe that's the gimmick and it's like some sort of like degenerate OTK strategy that people don't like. But like, is that the best thing Rogue could be doing? Maybe. This is Classic, so like it's not unthinkable. Not to mention, just as time goes on, it probably becomes easier and easier to combo. I could see a world where they do Hall of Fame this for the reason that I said. I am not leaning towards that being correct, although I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case.
Okay.
I think it's more likely that they would nerf this somehow, because I think this is like a fun card to play with, but I could also see there possibly being like some degenerate things with it as well, especially as Rogue gets more tools to just like funnel into this. So I will go with that it was nerfed, but I would not be surprised if it got Hall of Famed. Final answer.
Okay, this is Edwin VanCleef, bro, is one of the, I want to call it iconic rogue cards for sure. Being the main legendary for Rogue throughout Rogue's history, it has cemented itself as probably one of the best cards for Rogue. Okay. But this one goes on for a little bit longer. See, Edwin is just a 3-mana 2/2, but it just so happened that the coin, which you get for going second, also counts as a card. And any cards you generate from, you know, that cost 0 mana, or you can make 0 mana, can make Edwin into a very big boy. But the trade-off for Edwin is that you're kind of all in. If your opponent can answer this big meatball, you just lose the game on this spot. Which means Edwin VanCleef was not nerfed until this card saw play in every single world championship. Every single one. Until the point it was finally rotated out of standard. In the very last expansion, it was in standard. It was nerfed to 4 mana. The very last one. Now think about it like this. Every world championship, every single tournament, I believe, but mainly every single world championship, this card was played and was, I believe, in the winning lineup for every, not the winning lineup, the finals of every single thing. I could be wrong about that, but I remember seeing it virtually in every world championship. This card, people were asking for it to be Hall of Famed because I don't think anybody really wants to play a game where Rogue has the perfect hand and you just lose.
Conceal, 1 mana, give your minions stealth until your next turn. This, the way that we've been discussing design philosophy throughout this video, I could really see an argument for them to potentially Hall of Fame this card because stealth, if I recall, is just, nothing can interact with the card, right? The only thing that can really affect it is like AoE type effects, right?
Yes. Yep.
So I could see a world where they would not want something like this in the game because this is like a Yu-Gi-Oh problem where when there's cards in the game that don't let you interact with the other player, people just generally hate those types of cards. And not to mention, this isn't just like one minion, it's all the minions, right? So if you have like some combo potentially, and then you just like stealth it up and it's like, good luck. If you don't have like this exact out, I win the game next turn, possibly something like, you know, with Edwin VanCleef, I could see that not being fun. And with like how we've been like discussing things throughout this video, I don't think it's out of the question that they did Hall of Fame this for that reason, especially because this card costs 1. I will happily be wrong. I am going to say they Hall of Fame this because they thought stealthing your shit is not fun and interactive to play against at all. And that goes against their design philosophy.
Okay, so Conceal, let's just take a step back from Conceal for a second. Let's go to Edwin VanCleef. Sure. Edwin VanCleef in beta read a little bit different than what he currently said. You know what he said above his little combo line there? It said he had stealth.
He had stealth in addition to all.
So you can imagine a world where like Edwin VanCleef in beta was something special. Like it was a card for sure. So that's obviously wild. Blizzard looked at that and said, we can't fucking have this in the game, man. So they removed stealth. They released it as it was when Hearthstone was fully released as just a combo +2/+2. And Edwin like got on his merry way. But they did have Conceal. Now, before we get to what the answer actually is, I'm going to read you through Conceal's card changes before Hearthstone was actually released.
Okay, so this is like the alpha beta.
This is the alpha of this card, right? It was added to the game at 0 mana, and it was give a friendly minion stealth. Shortly after, it was nerfed to 1 mana. Then they nerfed it, then they buffed it back to 0 mana and changed it to give your minion stealth until your next turn. They then nerfed the cost to 1 from 0, and that's what they released this card in. This card was not touched for the rest of its time in standard until the point it was Hall of Famed.
Hey!
You're totally right. I'm going to read the Blizzard blurb here. Stealth is a very powerful mechanic. It can also be very frustrating to play against, more for some other classes than others. Hearthstone should ultimately be a game of plays and counterplays, and Conceal makes it increasingly more difficult for other classes to interact with rogue minions as time goes on. So the rogue play pattern was, if you got to turn 5, potentially turn 6, and you went Auctioneer into Conceal, there are very few cards in that current state that can interact with it. And if that's the game plan for Rogue, and you just go through the whole dream of getting to Leroy, Shadowstepping in, playing Leroy again, and killing your opponent out of nowhere, it feels fucking miserable.
Ancient of Lore, 7 mana, 5/5, choose one. Draw 2 cards or restore 5 health. We like drawing cards. This is like the funny thing, like health kind of matters in Hearthstone compared to like Yu-Gi-Oh. I feel like that's like one thing that's hard for me to quantify. This costs 7, but it's Druid, so you probably play it on turn 2. What was the other one? The Keeper of the Grove. That one did get nerfed. They nerfed this too. I could see this being another instance of, again, when you combine the Druid stuff, the fact that it has the mana ramping and all that, with the fact that if you play this super early, but if you don't really have any, you're just drawing cards with this. The 5 health is probably never happening. Good stats. Like if you're dropping this very early, the stats could be very annoying. My first instinct is that they nerf this to like 8 mana. Just because like 7 is like just too low for like how much you're getting, because you could play this like conceivably on like turn 4. So I'm gonna go with that. But I would honestly not be surprised if they just didn't touch this, because it's like it's a fine card. I'm going that they maybe just made this like either cost 1 more, or like maybe they changed it to like draw 1 card to maybe draw 2 cards was like too good for this.
Okay, so you're actually right. The second change is what they did. They made it to draw 1 card. But
really,
I'll go through the play pattern of why this was the case.
Okay.
So we obviously we also talked about Wild Growth. We talked about Innervate. There's also a card called Nourish, which is 5 mana, gain 2 mana crystals, or draw 3 cards. Now, you might be saying to yourself, wow, that's a pretty good card. And it was amazing. And in fact, they ended up nerfing that card at some point as well. But you would often want to play Nourish for gain 2 mana crystals. And
sure,
you might be like, okay, like then you're losing out on the cards. But then if you have Ancient Lore to draw you 2 cards and you also get a 5/5 body and you're like infinite mana ahead of your opponent, you're fine. Like you're not worried about resources whatsoever. When Classic Hearthstone came out, no one really, as far as I'm aware, like at least from like competitive standpoint or like looking at the metagame, not a lot of people realize the combination of Force of Nature plus Savage Roar. And that combo from nothing on board was 14 damage out of nowhere. Like that's
a lot.
Which is a absolute shit ton in Classic Hearthstone, especially because Druid had ramp. So the great thing about Ancient of Lore was not only do you get ahead on board and you're pushing more damage, but you also cycle faster to find that combo. And eventually what the game of Druid ended up being was, well, like, you know, you're kind of dying and you're almost at 14 health. So what are you going to do? And like you would sometimes use the 5 health, don't get me wrong. And like face hunter matchups, like it'd be much more important that you survive than drawing 2 more cards. Sure. But almost every single time you would go for the 2 cards. So that Nourish into Ancient of Lore combo was really, really good. So they ended up nerfing it. They nerfed it to what you said, to draw 1 card.
Sea Giant, 10 mana, costs 1 less for each other minion on the battlefield. All right, so if I've learned anything from you, mana reduction is good, and that means that you just need 10 things on the battlefield to make this cost 0. That seems pretty broken. I know your max is 7, but like it counts your opponent's stuff too.
Yes.
That seems pretty good. I could see it being nerfed 100%. I'm leaning towards did this get Hall of Famed? The reason I could see this getting Hall of Famed is kind of like what we've just been discussing, is there could just be a world where it's really hard for them to design new things knowing that Sea Giant specifically is in the game. Like any sort of like board swarming type effect or anything that just plays multiple things on the field, they always have to look at Sea Giant as like one of these cards that it's like, oh man, like we get to play this 8/8 for free. That could be a problem. Especially because it's neutral. That makes this even tougher too, because that means like any deck could try to take advantage of this. They did Hall of Fame Acolyte of Pain, so it's not unthinkable that they could do this as well. Yeah, I think I'm in the camp of they either made this cost like 12 mana, or they just completely Hall of Fame this just because there's so many levers they can't play with because this card's in the game. I'm going to go with nerfed, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was Hall of Famed. I think it's maybe more likely that they nerfed it instead.
Okay, so this one's actually a little bit of a tale for you. There were 3 giants released in Classic. There is the Sea Giant, which you see here. There is Mountain Giant, which is, you can read that if you want.
12 mana, 8/8, cost 1 less for each other card in your hand. Okay.
Okay, and then there was Molten Giant, which is the last.
I remember this guy. Didn't Warlock play this?
Warlock played this card. We'll get to that very shortly.
This looks familiar. Yeah.
So these are the 3 giants. We'll start with the most, probably the obvious one here. Molten Giant is a problem, and it has always been a problem. They have actually nerfed it a lot of times. They've adjusted it, like the mana cost. They haven't touched the stats. All the giants are 8/8s. They have had a lot of trouble actually figuring out like a really good Mana cost, because it really depends on what cards are available to Warlock. Because Warlock is the class that really likes to fuck around with this effect. Mountain Giant is one of my favorite cards as well. I really like the design of this because I think it's cool to, like, as a Warlock, tap and you play like hand lock and you try to get as many cards as you can in your hand to make this cheap. Earliest you can play this with the coin is turn 3 as an 8/8, which back in Classic was good. I wouldn't say it was like the best thing, but it could be really frustrating for a lot of classes. This card eventually, after so much time, was rotated out of the game. It was Hall of Famed. It was banned just like Mountain Giant. In its very last year, it was rotated. It was a very sad day for me, which leads us to Sea Giant. This
so 2 Hall of Fame so far.
This is the only one that wasn't Hall of Famed. It's also not nerfed. This card has been in the game as a 10 mana 8/8 for its entire time. It is currently in standard and still sees play to this day as a 10 mana 8/8. Now, cool. It is a cool card because the great thing about Sea Giant is if you know what the metagame is, you can tech your deck to have Sea Giants to really like blow out your opponent, which is a cool thing to think about, right? Sometimes like there's a deck that we had like relatively recently, which just flooded the board and then you just get free 8/8s. So like that kind of felt a little bad. And but they didn't nerf this card, they nerfed other cards around it. So yeah, Sea Giant is the only one that has not been nerfed. All right, I'm gonna show you one more card. And then this one is probably the most interesting, and I would love to hear your opinion on this.
Illidan. Okay. 6 mana, 7/5. Whenever you play a card, summon a 2/1 Flame of Azanoth. Azanoth?
Sure, that works. I don't know the actual.
There's a Yu-Gi-Oh card called Azathoth, so it's maybe it's the same inspiration there. Yeah. It's weird because if you play this on 6, this card kind of sucks because it doesn't do anything immediately. You need to like probably play this later to at least get like some value out of it. But if you play this on like 6 or something, like I'm thinking Rogue, right? If you play this at some point and then you stealth it, and then maybe on your next turn, you could play a bunch of cards that just then give you a bunch of these flames. But is getting like a whole board of 2/1s like particularly good? I don't know, man. This one's weird. I'm not seeing it. I think this guy's fine. I think this is fine. I don't think they touch this. So, like, lay it on me that they Hall of Fame this guy, by all means.
Okay, so there's a reason why I left this one to the very end. I want you to read his name again. Illidan Stormrage, right? You may notice that throughout this entire video, there has not been a single Demon Hunter card. Because Demon Hunter did not exist during the time of Classic. Which means the character Illidan Stormrage was available as a card. You may notice that there's never been a Jaina card, Jaina Pradmore card. There's never been a Malfurion card. There's never been a Gul'dan card. So when Demon Hunter was released in Ashes of Outlands, they removed this card from the game. You cannot,
because he is the Demon Hunter.
Because he is the Demon Hunter.
That's so cheap. Oh my god! I'm right. I was right. Oh my god, that's so stupid. They should make cards of all of them. That'd be fun.
I guess again, like it's the design philosophy of like, do we really want to have the most iconic classes or like iconic class characters as actual cards in the game? Because then it gets a little confusing. Not saying they couldn't, but like again, if Hearthstone's major design thing is like being easy to understand at a glance, I understand where they're coming from. This one was a trick question, bro. This one, don't even take this to heart. I just had to show you this because I thought it was fucking hilarious. So yeah, they
is it actually good though? At least tell me that.
It was fucking horrible. It was one of the worst cards in the game.
Thank God.
It was very bad. Good. So they took this card, Illidan Stormrage, and they completely removed it from the game. I actually believe right now, unless you have the card crafted from Classic, you can't. I could be wrong about that. Anyways, that's funny. They released this card as its replacement. It's the exact same card, but this is who they replaced it with. His name is Xavius. Not sure who that really is, but kind of fits the same vibe. I guess he's like another form of a Demon Hunter.
I see. So it's literally the same card. They just changed the name.
They changed it.
Like, I get it, right? Because Demon Hunter came out way later from my understanding from what you've told me. Yes. So like they didn't know in its inception that they were going to make another class. And this is like the guy of that class. Right?
Yes.
So it's like, I kind of get it. That's a very like funny like reason, all things considered. But okay. Like, sure.
That is
funny though. That's a funny part of the lore of Hearthstone.
Yeah, it's just I was going through this video and I was like going through the classic cards. I'm like, fuck, like they actually removed this card. Can I show it to him? I felt like it'd be so cheesy to be like, it was Hall of Fame. It was Hall of Fame, but actually like removed. Like I'm gonna actually, let me go check real fast. You can actually craft this card. I have actually no idea if it's possible.
Well, if there's ever Hearthstone trivia night, I'll have this one in my back pocket.
If you look up Illidan for wild cards, nothing comes up. It only comes up when you look at classic. So I'm actually not sure if you can craft this card.